So for my book review, I read the book The Water Will Come, Rising Seas, Sinking Cities, and the Remaking of the Civilized World by Jeff Goodell, published by Little Brown and Company of 2017. So some reasons why I chose this book was stemming from an interest that I came across in my earth science class about a year ago. And the topic was on the sixth mass extinction and how climate change and the time that we are living in geological time really is the sixth mass extinction caused by humans. And as a result of climate change, we would see rising sea levels. So, out of a lot of curiosity and wanting to know what a world would potentially look like with rising sea levels, I found this book, and it really did a good job in explaining what the future holds for our world in terms of rising sea levels. So, to summarize, this book, of course, addresses the current situation of rising sea levels and how, as a result of climate change, glaciers are melting at the South and the North Poles. And because these glaciers are melting, we're going to see a rise in sea levels, and this is going to really impact human life as we know it, especially the life on the coast. And what Goodell does a really good job in explaining that with these rising seas, we as a human civilization are going to see massive losses. And if we continue not to acknowledge climate change as a very big problem, or if we continue to not realize that sea levels are rising, everyone's lives in the world is going to change as a fact. So some main objectives that Goodell really does a good job in explaining is really informing his audience what could be the near future, where cities are sinking, where massive walls are going to be erected, but not a permanent solution, of course, and what we could stand to lose. And he makes it very clear that it's not just the monetary losses we're going to lose as a global community. Beaches, wildlife, major corporations, national world landmarks will also be very much destroyed or non-existent. Island nations will be wiped off the map. So he does this in a very successful way, and by taking the reader around the world. He puts first-hand accounts, he interviews a lot of people, and he makes it very clear that it's not just the United States, it's not just a situation that's going to happen in Miami. Miami is one of his big examples that he uses and dedicates quite a bit of chapters on. But he also states that it's going to be New York, Manhattan Island, the Marshall Islands, Lagos, Nigeria, Venice, Italy, big cities on the coast where a lot of people are living. And he makes it to very dire. The situation is very dire because in a lot of these areas you have a lot of people, a lot of infrastructure that is going to be lost as a result of rising sea levels. So I do believe that he makes a very good point in getting that information out. He also addresses the importance of the situation by allowing the situation to really affect the reader, because in a sense, we as a global community pay taxes to help build infrastructure. And a lot of what these cities are going to have to do is erect massive seawalls. And where's that money going to come from? Well, it's going to be coming from the taxpayers. And as a result of rising sea levels, some people will have to move. And so the decision is whether or not to sell your home, to stay in your home and watch it sink. And it gets very personal on that aspect. Goodell also does a good job by explaining the science of what is really happening. He explains the melting of the glaciers and how the North Pole is really melting at a quite significant rate, but also how the South Pole, if the temperature continues to rise, could melt as well as a quick rate as well. He also talks about climate change and how because we are emitting CO2 emissions into the air, how as a result we're going to have rising sea levels. He also explains the history of rising seas. Rising seas is nothing new. In geological time, people have continued to move to higher ground for a long time. He just says that at this point in time, it's become a lot harder because we have more infrastructure. And so now to some major themes in this book. He really talks a lot about the Obama administration and politics, how politics has to work out this growing problem of climate change. He also talks about how the U.S. was on track during the ending of the Obama administration into the Trump presidency about the climate accords in Paris. There also is this notion of the struggle between having a good economy and the commitment to less pollution. And this is really illustrated and highlighted by the fact that the U.S. kind of wants to open oil reserves in Canada to boost their state economy. But on the other hand, you would be releasing more CO2 emissions into the air. He also, another major point that Goodell talks about are the sinking cities. Cities that are going to be affected deeply by the rise of sea level. He talks about Venice, Manhattan, Miami, Lagos, Nigeria. In the terms of Miami, it's whether or not to sell your condo. In Venice, it's not so much about the people, but of course the landmarks that have been there for a very good amount of time. The basilicas, the frescoes, the architecture, how the city itself is trying to protect its world landmarks. And this is all illustrated by how the cities are creating plans to protect their landmarks, their cities, by erecting these massive seawalls. He also goes into much development on these seawalls and how much money is it really going to cost a country, a community, and how sometimes these designs are not always the best. There's no right, correct design. There are always flaws. There's always negatives and positives. And especially how erecting a seawall is not exactly a permanent solution, because over time, abrasion, erosion will, salt from the sea is going to diminish the infrastructure of these seawalls. In terms of recommendation, I do recommend this book. It was very insightful and expands upon the topic of rising sea levels. And it gets to more than that. It really explains the political side, the political side of what countries will have to go through, the monetary side of how millions of dollars are going to be spent on erecting all these seawalls, and how the solutions are not always permanent. So it really gets to the nitty-gritty details of what are we going to do if sea level does rise, which it is, and what is our world going to look like. And so it makes people really, or readers at least, realize that it is a very present problem that we're going to face. And it's going to stop people from negating the fact that climate change is not real. And like our president likes to say, is fake news. No. This book, it simply addresses that if you do not believe in climate change, you're reading the wrong book. So in conclusion, this book takes you almost everywhere. It explains that the suffering that people will endure, and what global communities around the world are going to try to do to really prevent their cities from sinking. And it's going to affect us all. And that's the point that I really liked about this book. It's going to affect us all in some way.